Fireside Tailes with Wolfgang, Episode 11. Originally broadcast on GWC Productions YouTube channel, CAPS Media Television Channel 6, KPPQ-LP Ventura at 104.1 FM, and on the KPPQ Podcast Network. Greetings and salutations. I'm Hunter Ackerman, here to read some classic literature for you and my beastly feline companion Wolfgang. So Wolfus, what do you want to hear? Transience in Arcadia by O. Henry. There's a certain hotel on Broadway that is very pleasant in the summer. Not many people have heard about it. It is wide and cool. Its rooms have walls of dark wood. There are green trees about it and soft winds. It has all the pleasures of mountain living and none of the pains. You will eat better fish than you could catch for yourself in streams in the hills. You will have better meat than a hunter brings home from the forest. A few have discovered this cool spot in the hot summer of New York. You will see these few guests eating dinner in the hotel restaurant. They're happy to be there and happy to know that they are very few. They feel especially wise because they have found this delightful place. More waiters than necessary are always near. They bring what is wanted before anyone asks for it. The pleasing, distant noise of Broadway sounds like running water in a forest. At every strange footstep, the guests turn quickly and look. They're afraid that the restless pleasure seekers will find their hotel and destroy its pleasant quiet. And so, these few live during the hot season. They enjoy the delights of mountain and seashore. All is brought to them in their Broadway hotel. This summer, a lady came to the hotel giving the name Madame Hellois d'Arcadie Beaumont. Her name was like a name in the story of a great romance, and Madame Beaumont was the kind of lady that the Hotel Lotus loved. She was beautiful, and her manner was very fine. Everyone wished to serve her. The other guests believed that as a guest, she was perfection. This perfect guest did not often leave the hotel. In this, she was like the other guests of the Hotel Lotus. To enjoy that hotel, one needed to forget the city. New York might have been miles away. At night, sometimes one might go out, but during the hot day, one remained in the cool shade of the Lotus. Madame was alone in the Hotel Lotus. She was alone as a queen is alone because of her high position. She rose from bed late in the morning. She was then a sweet, soft person who seemed to shine quietly. But at dinner, she was different. She would wear a beautiful dress. I cannot find words fine enough to tell about it. Always there were red flowers at her shoulder. When the head waiter saw a dress like this, he met it at the door. You thought of Paris when you saw it, and of the theater, and of old romances. A story about Madame Beaumont was told among the guests in the Hotel Lotus. It was said that she was a woman who had traveled all over the world. It was said that she knew the most important people everywhere. It was said that in her white hands, she held the future of certain nations. It was no surprise, they said, that such a lady should choose the Hotel Lotus. It was the most desirable and the most restful place in America during the heat of the summer. On the third day of Madame Beaumont's stay in the hotel, a young man entered as a guest. His clothes were quiet, but good. His face was pleasant. His expression was that of a man who had traveled and could understand the world. He said that he would remain 3 or 4 days. He asked about the sailing of certain ships. He seemed to like this hotel the best of all he had known. The young man put his name on the list of hotel guests. Harold Farrington. It was a name with a fine sound, and the young man belonged perfectly in the quiet life of the Lotus. In 1 day, he became like all the other guests. Like them, he had his table and his waiter. He also had the same fear that the wrong people might suddenly discover this hotel and destroy its peace. After dinner on the next day, Madame Beaumont dropped something as she passed Harold Farrington's table. He picked it up, and, following her, he returned it. He spoke only a few quiet words as he did this, and she was pleased by his good manners. She knew that he was a gentleman. Guests of the Lotus seemed to understand each other very easily. Perhaps it was the result of having discovered this Broadway hotel. Guests felt sure that only especially fine people would enjoy the cool delights of the Lotus. Now, very quickly, a sudden friendship grew between Farrington and Madame Beaumont. They stood and talked for a few moments. "I have seen too many of the usual summer hotels," said Madame Beaumont, with a small but sweet smile. "Why go to the mountains or the seashore? We cannot escape noise and dust there. The people who make the noise and dust follow us there." "Even on the ocean," said Farrington sadly, "those same people are all around us. What shall we do when they discover the Lotus?" "I hope they don't discover the Lotus this week," said Madame. "I only know of one other place I like as well. It is the beautiful home of a prince in the mountains in Europe." "The best people," said Farrington, "are seeking for the quiet places like this one where they can escape the crowds." "I promise myself 3 more days of this delightful rest," said Madame Beaumont. "The next day, my ship, she sails." Harold Farrington's eyes showed that he was sorry. "I too must leave then," he said. "But I am not sailing for Europe." "I cannot stay here forever, though it is so delightful," said Madame Beaumont. "I like it better than my usual life, which is too full of people. I shall never forget my week in the Hotel Lotus." "Nor shall I," said Farrington in a low voice, "and I shall never like the ship that carries you away." On their last evening, the two sat together at a little table. A waiter brought them something cool to eat. Madame Beaumont was wearing the same beautiful dress. She seemed thoughtful. When she had finished eating, she took out $1. "Mr. Farrington," she said, with a smile that everyone in the Lotus loved, "I want to tell you something. I'm going to leave early tomorrow morning because I must go back to work. I work selling women's clothes at Casey's shop. That dollar is all the money I have. I won't have more until I get paid at the end of the week. You are a real gentleman and you've been good to me. I wanted to tell you before I went. For a year, I've been planning to come here. Each week I put aside a little of my pay so that I would have enough money. I wanted to live 1 week like a rich lady. I wanted to get up in the morning when I wished. I wanted to be served by the waiters. I wanted to have the best of everything. Now I've done it and I've been happier than I ever was before. And now I'm going back to work. I wanted to tell you about it, Mr. Farrington, because I thought you liked me and I liked you. This week I've told you many things that weren't true. I told you things I've read about. They never happened to me. I've been living in a story. It wasn't real. I wanted you to think I was a great lady. This dress I'm wearing, it's the only pretty dress I own. I haven't paid for it yet. I'm paying for it a little at a time. The price was $75. It was made for me at O'Dowd and Levinsky's shop. I paid $10 first, and now I have to pay $1 a week until it's all paid. And that's all I have to say, Mr. Farrington, except that my name is Mamie Seviter, not Madame Beaumont. Thank you for listening to me. This dollar is the dollar I'm going to pay for my dress tomorrow. And now I go up to my room. As Harold Farrington listened, his face had not changed. When she had finished, he took out a small book and began to write in it. Then he pulled out the small page with his writing on it, and he gave it to her. And he took the dollar from her hand. I go to work too, tomorrow morning, he said. And I decided to begin now. That paper says you've paid your dollar for this week. I've been working for O'Dowd and Levinsky for 3 years. Strange, isn't it? We both had the same idea. I always wanted to stay at a good hotel. I get $20 a week. Like you, I put aside a little money at a time until I had enough. Listen, Mommy, will you go to the pleasure park on Coney Island with me on payday? The girl who had been Madame Eloise Beaumont smiled. I'd love to go, Mr. Farrington. Coney will be all right, although we did live here with rich people for a week. They could hear the night noises of the hot city. Inside the Hotel Lotus, it was cool. The waiter stood near, ready to get anything they asked for. Madame Beaumont started up to her room for the last time. And he said, forget that Harold Farrington, will you? McManus is the name. James McManus. Some call me Jimmy. Good night, Jimmy, said Madame. Places by Sara Teasdale. There was a bush with scarlet berries, and there were hemlocks heaped with snow, with a sound like surf On long sea benches they took the wind and let it go. The hills were shining in their samite. Fold after fold they flowed away. Let come what may, your eyes were saying. At least we too have had today. I'm going to start tonight with a poem called Love One Another by Khalil Gibran. Love one another, but make not a bond of love. Let it rather be a moving sea between the shores of your souls. Fill each other's cup, but drink not from one cup. Give one another of your bread, but eat not from the same loaf. Sing and dance together and be joyous, but let each one of you be alone, even as the strings of a lute are alone, though they quiver with the same music. Give your hearts, but not into each other's keeping, for only the hand of life can contain your hearts. And stand together, yet not too near together, for the pillars of the temple stand apart, and the oak tree and the cypress grow not in each other's shadow. It's a little reminiscent of the Gift of the Magi. Because it's this wonderful telling of love fully, but don't expect to completely own each other. It's a balance. Mother to Son by Langston Hughes. Well, son, I'll tell you, life for me ain't been no crystal stair. It's had tacks in it, and splinters, and boards torn up, and places with no carpet on the floor. Bare. But all the time I's been climbing on and reaching landings and turning corners and sometimes going in the dark where there ain't been no light. So boy, don't you turn back. Don't you set down on the steps, 'cause you finds it's kinder hard. Don't you fall now, for I's still going, honey. I's still climbing. And life for me ain't been no crystal stair. A Western. And don't let the author fool you. There was an author who was not the professional wrestler, but who was also named Bret Harte. This author lived from 1836 to 1902. And so this story takes place, let's see, it was published in 1869, but it actually takes place in 1850. So this story is just slightly pre-Civil War. This is The Outcasts of Poker Flat by Bret Harte. As Mr. John Oakhurst, gambler, stepped into the main street of Poker Flat on the morning of the 23rd of November, 1850, he was conscious of a change in its moral atmosphere since the preceding night. 2 or 3 men, conversing earnestly together, ceased as he approached and exchanged significant glances. There was a Sabbath lull in the air, which, in a settlement unused to Sabbath influences, looked ominous. Mr. Oakhurst's calm, handsome face betrayed small concern in these indications. Whether he was conscious of any predispositioning cause was another question. "I reckon they're after somebody," he reflected. "Likely it's me." He returned to his pocket the handkerchief, which he had been wiping away the red dust of Poker Flat from his neat boots, and quietly discharged his mind of any further conjecture. In point of fact, Poker Flat was after somebody. It had lately suffered the loss of several $1,000s, 2 valuable horses, and a prominent citizen. It was experiencing a spasm of virtuous reaction, quite as lawless and ungovernable as any of the acts that had provoked it. A secret committee had determined to rid the town of all improper persons. This was done permanently in regard of 2 men who were then hanging from the boughs of a sycamore in the gulch, and temporarily in the banishment of certain other objectionable characters. I regret to say that some of these were ladies. It is but due to the sex, however, to the state that their impropriety was professional, and it was only in such easily established standards of evil that Poker Flat ventured to sit in judgment. Mr. Oakhurst was right in supposing that he was included in this category. A few of the committee had urged hanging him as a possible example, and a sure method of reimbursing themselves from his pockets of the sums he had won from them. "It's against justice," said Jim Wheeler, "to let this here young man from Roaring Camp, entire stranger, carry away our money." But a crude sentiment of equity residing in the breasts of those who had been fortunate enough to win from Mr. Oakhurst overruled this narrower local prejudice. Mr. Oakhurst received his sentence with philosophic calmness, none the less coolly that he was aware of the hesitation of his judges. He was too much of a gambler not to accept fate. With him, life was at best an uncertain game, and he recognized the usual percentage in favor of the dealer. A body of armed men accompanied the deported wickedness of Poker Flat to the outskirts of the settlement. Besides Mr. Oakhurst, who was known to be a coolly desperate man, and for whose intimidation the armed escort was intended, the expatriated party consisted of a young woman familiarly known as the Duchess, another who had won the title of Mother Shipton, and Uncle Billy, a suspected sluice robber and confirmed drunkard. Sip. The cavalcade provoked no comments from the spectators, nor was any word uttered by the escort. Only when the gulch, which marked the uttermost limit of Poker Flat, was reached, the leader spoke briefly and to the point. The exiles were forbidden to return at the peril of their lives. As the escort disappeared, their pent-up feelings found vent in a few hysterical tears from the Duchess, some bad language from Mother Shipton, and a Parthian volley of expletives from Uncle Billy. The philosophic Oakhurst alone remained silent. He listened calmly to Mother Shipton's desire to cut somebody's heart out, to the repeated statements of the Duchess that she would die in the road, and to the alarming oaths that seemed to be bumped out of Uncle Billy as he rode forward. With the easy good humor characteristic of his class, he insisted upon exchanging his own riding horse, 5-Spot, for the sorry mule which the Duchess rode. But even this act did not draw the party into any closer sympathy. The young woman readjusted her somewhat draggled plumes with a feeble, faded coquetry. Mother Shipton eyed the possessor of 5 Spot with malevolence, and Uncle Billy included the whole party in one sweeping anathema. The road to Sandy Bar, a camp that, not having as yet experienced the regenerating influences of Poker Flat, consequently seemed to offer some invitation to the immigrants, lay over a steep mountain range. It was a distant day's severe travel, and in that advanced season, the party soon passed out of the moist, temperate regions of the foothills into the dry, cold, bracing air of the Sierras. The trail was narrow and difficult. At noon, the Duchess, rolling out of her saddle upon the ground, declared her intention of going no farther, and the party halted. The spot was singularly wild and impressive. A wooded amphitheater, surrounded on 3 sides by precipitous cliffs of naked granite, sloped gently toward the crest of another precipice that overlooked the valley. It was undoubtedly the most suitable spot for a camp, having had camping been advisable. But Mr. Oakhurst knew that scarcely half the journey to Sandy Bar was accomplished, and the party were not equipped or provisioned for delay. This fact he pointed out to his companions curtly, with a philosophic commentary on the folly of throwing up their hand before the game was played out. But they were furnished with liquor, which in this emergency stood them in place of food, fuel, rest, and thoughtful foresight. In spite of these remonstrances, it was not long before they were more or less under its influence. Uncle Billy passed rapidly from a bellicose state into one of stupor. The Duchess became maudlin, and Mother Shipton snored. Mr. Oakhurst alone remained erect, leaning against a rock, calmly surveying them. Mr. Oakhurst did not drink. It interfered with a profession which required coolness, impassiveness, and presence of mind. And in his own language, he couldn't afford it. As he gazed at his recumbent fellow exiles, the loneliness begotten of his pariah trade, his habits of life, his very vices, for the first time seriously oppressed him. He bestirred himself in dusting his black clothes, washing his hands and face, and other acts characteristic of his studiously neat habits, and for a moment forgot his annoyance. The thought of deserting his weaker and more pitiable companions never perhaps occurred to him. Yet, he could not help feeling the lack of that excitement which was most conducive to that evenness of a temper for which he was notorious. He looked at the gloomy walls that rose 1,000 feet sheer above the circling pines about him, at the sky ominously clouded, at the valley below, already deepening into shadow, and, doing so, suddenly he heard his own name called. A horseman slowly ascended the trail. In the fresh, open face of the newcomer, Mr. Oakhurst recognized Tom Simpson, otherwise known as the Innocent of Sandy Bar. He had met with him some months before over a little game, and had, with perfect equanimity, won the entire fortune, amounting to some $40, from that guileless youth. After the game was finished, Mr. Oakhurst drew the youthful speculator behind the door and thus addressed him. "Tommy, you're a good little man, an innocent man, but you can't gamble worth a damn cent. Don't ever try it over again." He then handed him his money back, pushed him gently from the room, and so made a devoted slave and follower of the innocent Tom Simpson. There was a remembrance of this in his boyish and enthusiastic greeting of Mr. Oakhurst. He had started, he said, to go into Poker Flat to seek his fortune. Alone? No, not exactly alone. In fact, a giggle. He had run away with Piney Woods. Didn't Mr. Oakhurst remember Piney? She who used to wait on the table at the Temperance House. They had been engaged a long time, but old Jake Woods had objected, so they had run away. They were going to Poker Flat to be married. And here they were. And they were tired out. And how lucky was it that they had found a place to camp and company? All this, the innocent delivered rapidly, while Piney, a stout, comely damsel of 15, emerged from behind the pine tree where she had been blushing unseen and rode to the side of her lover. Mr. Oakhurst seldom troubled himself with sentiment, still less with propriety, but he had a vague idea that the situation was not fortunate. He retained, however, his presence of mind sufficiently to kick Uncle Billy, who was about to say something, and Uncle Billy was sober enough to recognize in Mr. Oakhurst's kick a superior power that would not bear trifling. He then endeavored to dissuade Tom Simpson from delaying further, but in vain. He even pointed out the fact that there was no provision nor means of making a camp, but, unluckily, the innocent met this objection by assuring the party that he was provided with an extra mule loaded with provisions, and by the discovery of a rude attempt at a log house near the trail. I got a cabin right over there. Piney can stay with Mrs. Oakhurst, said the innocent, pointing to the Duchess, and I can shift for myself. Nothing but Mr. Oakhurst's admonishing foot saved Uncle Billy from bursting into a roar of laughter. If you missed that, the Duchess was a hooker and not Mrs. Oakhurst, you know. As it was, he felt compelled to retire up the canyon until he could recover his gravity. There he confided the joke to the tall pine trees with many slaps of his leg, contortions of his face, and the usual profanity. But when Uncle Billy returned to the party, he found them seated by a fire, for the air had grown strangely chill and the sky overcast. They were engaged in apparently amicable conversation. Piney was actually talking in an impulsive, girlish fashion to the Duchess, who was listening with an interest and animation she had not shown for many days. The innocent was holding forth, apparently with equal effect, to Mr. Oakhurst and Mother Shipton, who was actually relaxing into amiability. "Is this your damn picnic?" said Uncle Billy with inward scorn as he surveyed the sylvan group, the glancing firelight and the tethered animals in the foreground. Suddenly, an idea mingled with the alcoholic fumes that disturbed his brain. It was apparently of a jocular nature, for he felt impelled to slap his leg again and cram his fist into his mouth. As the shadows crept slowly up the mountain, a slight breeze rocked the tops of the pine trees and moaned through their long and gloomy aisles. The ruined cabin, patched and covered with pine boughs, was set apart for the ladies. As the lovers parted, they unaffectedly exchanged a kiss, so honest and sincere that it might have been heard above the swaying pines. The frail Duchess and the malevolent Mother Shipton were probably too stunned to remark upon this last evidence of simplicity, and so, returned without a word to the hut. The fire was replenished. The men lay down before the door, and in a few minutes were asleep. Mr. Oakhurst was a light sleeper. Toward morning, he awoke, benumbed and cold. As he stirred the dying fire, the wind, which was now blowing strongly, brought to his cheek that which caused the blood to leave it. Snow. 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 He started to his feet with the intention of wakening the sleepers, for there was no time to lose, but turning to where Uncle Billy had been lying, he found him gone. A suspicion leapt to his brain and a curse to his lips. He ran to the spot where the mules had been tethered. They were no longer there. The tracks were already rapidly disappearing in the snow. The momentary excitement brought Mr. Oakhurst back to the fire with his usual calm. He did not waken the sleepers. The innocent slumbered peacefully with a smile on his good-humored, freckled face. The virgin Piney slept beside her frailer sisters as sweetly as though attended by celestial guardians, and Mr. Oakhurst, drawing his blanket over his shoulders, stroked his mustaches and waited for the dawn. It came slowly in a whirling mist of snowflakes that dazzled and confused the eye. What could be seen of the landscape appeared magically changed. He looked over the valley and summed up the present and future in 2 words. Snowed in. A careful inventory of the provisions, which, fortunately for the party, had been stored within the hut, and so escaped the felonious fingers of Uncle Billy, disclosed the fact that with care and prudence they might last 10 days longer. "That is," said Mr. Oakhurst, sotto-voice to the innocent, "if you're willing to board us. If you ain't, and perhaps you'd better not, you can wait till Uncle Billy gets back with provisions." For some occult reason, Mr. Oakhurst could not bring himself to disclose Uncle Billy's rascality, and so offered the hypothesis that he had wandered from the camp and had accidentally stampeded the animals. He dropped a warning to the Duchess and Mother Shipton, who, of course, knew the facts of their associate's defection. "They'll find out the truth about us all when they find out anything," he added significantly. "And there ain't no good frightening them now." Tom Simpson, the innocent, not only put all his worldly store at the disposal of Mr. Oakhurst, but seemed to enjoy the prospect of their enforced seclusion. Tom said, "We'll have a good camp for a week, then the snow will melt, then we'll all go back together." The cheerful gaiety of the young man and Mr. Oakhurst's calm infected the others. The innocent Tom, with the aid of pine boughs, extemporized a thatch for the roofless cabin, and the Duchess directed Piney in the rearrangement of the interior with a taste and tact that opened the blue eyes of that provincial maiden to their fullest extent. "I reckon now you're used to fine things at Poker Flat," said Piney. The Duchess turned away sharply to conceal something that reddened her cheeks through its professional tint, and Mother Shipton requested Piney not to chatter. But when Mr. Oakhurst returned from a weary search for the trail, he heard the sound of happy laughter echoed from the rocks. He stopped in some alarm, and his first thoughts naturally reverted to the whiskey which he had prudently cached. "And yet, It don't somehow sound like whiskey, said the gambler. It was not until he caught sight of the blazing fire through the still blinding storm and the group around it that he settled into the conviction that it was just square fun. Whether Mr. Oakhurst had cached his cards with the whiskey as something to preclude the free access of the community, I cannot say. It was certain that in Mother Shipton's words, he didn't say cards even once during that evening. Happily, the time was beguiled by an accordion, produced somewhat ostentatiously by Tom Simpson from his pack. Notwithstanding some difficulties with the manipulation of this instrument, Piney Woods managed to pluck several reluctant melodies from its keys to an accompaniment by the innocent on a pair of bone castanets. But the crowning festivity of the evening was reached in a rude camp-meeting hymn, which the lovers, joining hands, sang with a great loud earnestness. I fear that a defiant tone, rather than any devotional quality, caused it to speedily infect the others, who at last joined in the last refrain. I'm proud to live in the service of the Lord, and I'm bound to die in his army. The pines rocked. The storm eddied and whirled above the miserable group, and the flames of their altar leapt heavenward, as if in token of the vow. At midnight, the storm abated. The rolling clouds parted, and the stars glittered keenly above the sleeping camp. Mr. Oakhurst, whose professional habits had enabled him to live on the smallest possible amount of sleep, in dividing the watch with Tom Simpson, somehow managed to take upon himself the greater part of that duty. He excused himself to the innocent by saying that he had often been a week without sleep. Doing what? Asked Tom. Poker, replied Oakhurst. When a man gets a streak of luck, great luck, he don't get tired. That luck gives in first. Luck, continued the gambler reflectively, is a mighty strange thing. All you know about for certain is it is bound to change. And it's finding out when it's going to change that makes you. Now, we had a stroke of bad luck since we left Poker Flat. You come along, and slap, you get into it too. If you can hold your cards right along, you're all right. 4, added the gambler with cheerful irreverence. I'm proud to live in the service of the Lord, and I'm bound to die in his army. The third day came, and the sun, looking through the white curtained valley, saw the outcasts divide their slowly decreasing store of provisions for the morning meal. It was one of the peculiarities of that mountain climate that its rays diffused a kindly warmth over the wintry landscape, as if in regretful commiseration of the past, but it revealed drift on drift of snow piled high around the hut, a hopeless, uncharted, trackless sea of white lying below the rocky shores to which the castaways still clung. Through the marvelously clean air, the smoke of the pastoral village of Poker Flat rose miles away. Mother Shipton saw it, and from a remote pinnacle of her rocky fastness, she hurled in that direction a final malediction. It was her last vituperative attempt, and perhaps for that reason, she was invested with a certain degree of sublimity. It did her good, she privately informed the Duchess. Just you go out there and cuss and see. Then she set herself to the task of amusing the child, as she and the Duchess were pleased to call Piney. Piney was no chicken, but It was a soothing and original theory of the pair, thus to account for the fact that she didn't swear and wasn't improper. Piney is the 15-year-old married virgin. Yeah. When night crept up again through the gorges, the reedy notes of the accordion rose and fell in the fitful spasms and long-drawn gasps by the flickering campfire. But music failed to fill entirely the aching void left by insufficient food, and a new diversion was proposed by Piney: storytelling. Neither Mr. Oakhurst nor his female companions caring to relate their personal experiences, this plan would have failed too, but for the innocent. Some months before, the innocent Tom had chanced upon a stray copy of Mr. Pope's ingenious translation of the Iliad. He now proposed to narrate the principal incidents of that epic poem, having thoroughly mastered the argument and fairly forgotten the words in the current vernacular of Sandy Bar. And so for the rest of the night, the Homeric demigods again walked the earth. Trojan bully and wily Greek wrestled in the winds, and the great pines in the canyon seemed to bow to the wrath of the son of Peleus. Mr. Oakhurst listened with quiet satisfaction. Most especially was he interested in the fate of the ash heels, as the innocent persisted in denominating the swift-footed Achilles. Yeah, he called Achilles ash heels. That's just his dialect. So, with small food and much of Homer and the accordion, a week passed over the heads of the outcasts. The sun again forsook them, and again from leaden skies the snowflakes were sifted over the land. Day by day, closer around them drew the snowy circle until at last they looked from their prison over drifted walls of dazzling white that towered 20 feet above their heads. It became more and more difficult to replenish their fires, even from the fallen trees beside them, now half hidden in the snowdrifts. Yet no one complained. The lovers turned from the dreary prospect and looked into each other's eyes and were happy. Mr. Oakhurst settled himself coolly to the losing game before him. The Duchess, more cheerful than she had been, assumed the care of Piney. Only Mother Shipton, once the strongest of the party, seemed to sicken and fade. At midnight on the 10th day, she called Oakhurst to her side. "I'm going," she said, in a voice of querulous weakness. "But don't say nothing about it. Don't waken the kids. Take the bundle from under my head and open it." Mr. Oakhurst did so. It contained Mother Shipton's rations for the last week, untouched. "Give them to the child," she said, pointing to the sleepy Piney. "You starved yourself," said the gambler Oakhurst. "That's what they call it," said the woman, as she lay down again, and, turning her face to the wall, she passed quietly away. The accordion and the bones were put aside that day, and Homer was forgotten. When the body of Mother Shipton had been committed to the snow, Mr. Oakhurst took the innocent aside and showed him a pair of snowshoes which he had fashioned from the old pack saddle. "There's one chance in 100 to save her yet," he said, pointing to Piney. "But it's there," he added, pointing toward Poker Flat. "If you can reach there in 2 days, she's safe." And you? Asked Tom Simpson. I'll stay here, was the curt reply. The lovers, Piney and Tom, parted with a long embrace. You are not going too? Said the Duchess as she saw Mr. Oakhurst apparently waiting to accompany him. As far as the canyon, he replied. He turned suddenly and kissed the Duchess, leaving her pallid face aflame and her trembling limbs rigid with excitement and amazement. Night came, but not Mr. Oakhurst. It brought the storm again and the whirling snow. Then the Duchess, feeding the fire, found that someone had quietly piled beside the hut enough fuel to last a few days longer. The tears rose to her eyes, but she hid them from Piney. The women slept but little. In the morning, looking into each other's faces, they read their fate. Neither spoke, but Piney, accepting the position of the stronger, drew near and placed her arm around the Duchess's waist. They kept this attitude for the rest of the day. That night the storm reached its greatest fury, and, rending asunder the protecting pines, invaded the very hut. Toward morning, they found themselves unable to feed the fire, which gradually died away. As the embers slowly blackened, the Duchess crept closer to Piney and broke the silence of many hours. Piney, can you pray? No, dear, said Piney, simply. The Duchess, without knowing exactly why, felt relieved, and putting her head upon Piney's shoulder, spoke no more. And so reclining, the younger and purer, pillowing the head of her soiled sister upon her virgin breast, they fell asleep. The wind lulled as if it feared to waken them. Feathery drifts of snow shaken from the long pine boughs flew like white-winged birds and settled about them as they slept. The moon through the rifted clouds looked down upon what had been the camp, but all human stain, all trace of earthly travail was hidden beneath the spotless mantle mercifully flung from above. They slept all that day and the next, nor did they waken when voices and footsteps broke the silence of the camp, and when pitying fingers brushed the snow from their wan faces. You could have scarcely told from the equal peace that dwelt upon them which was she that had sinned. Even the law of Poker Flat recognized this and turned away, leaving them still locked in each other's arms. But at the head of the gulch, on one of the largest pine trees, they found the deuce of clubs pinned to the bark with a bowie knife. It bore the following, written in pencil, in a firm hand. Beneath this tree lies the body of John Oakhurst, who struck a streak of bad luck on the 23rd of November, 1850, and handed in his checks on the 7th November, 1850. And pulseless and cold, with a derringer by his side and a bullet in his heart, though still calm as in life, beneath the snow lay he who was at once the strongest and yet the weakest of the Outcasts of Poker Flat. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Fireside Tales with Wolfgang. To view more of my work, check out my YouTube channel at Hunter's Acoustic Cabin. Directed by Hunter Ackerman. Endorsed by Wolfgang Beastly. Produced by GWC Productions. Originally broadcast on GWC Productions' YouTube channel, CAPS Media Television Channel 6, KPPQ LP Ventura at 104.1 FM, and on the KPPQ Podcast Network.